one of the things I love are stories from people who come from outside of this country because of how great it is. They're not trying to turn America into what they came from, they are embracing the American dream. Today, I have a guest who I think shares that dream. In fact, he wrote a book called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America, a love letter from an immigrant. Christian Ray Flores, thank you for joining us here on the Constitution Study.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, I'm thankful that your people put us together. They reached out, and I have to admit I hadn't heard of you, but they did send me a copy of your book, and I got a chance to read it. And thank you very much. But when I learned about your story, and for those of you who don't know, when the show page hits, when your information should be there, and the bullet point list about your life, it's an amazing life. It's that what's the ancient Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times. It seems like you've lived some interesting times.
Yes, that is true. That is very, very true. Yes.
But again, I read your book. I looked at your bio. If you were born in Chile and brought to the United States, that would have been quite a story in and of itself.
Yeah,
Uh,
actually fascist Chile because
Fascist
it
Chile.
it was it was a communist president who was overthrown by a fascist regime. So it was like a little bit of both. And yeah, I was a refugee at age 5. My dad was in a concentration camp for a while. He was lucky to just get out alive and they tortured and killed a bunch of people and they imprisoned and put people in secret prisons all over the country and it was an ultra right military regime, but they overthrew a socialist regime. So I got a taste of both sides of both extremes in one fell swoop as my first childhood experience, basically.
So tell me a little bit of the rest of that story, the rest of what was going on. It sounds like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
But again, I read your book and I looked at your bio on your website, and I mean, if you were to have been born in Chile and been brought here to the United States, it'd be an amazing story. But that's not what happened.
That is not what happened. No.
So tell me also a little bit of that story because I thought it was fascinating. The the experiences you have and what it led to that ended up in this book. But
So what happened was very different, obviously, and no one, I don't think anyone would have predicted this, right? But I'm a refugee. We're in a refugee facility. We get asylum. We end up going to Germany, then back to the Soviet Union, then to Africa. My dad got a job there. So I changed 4 countries by age 7. I was completely confused, right? And talk about whiplash, right? And I grew up in Mozambique in Africa. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, but it was a fabulous childhood from one perspective. It was sort of bizarre from another. There was also a civil war that started about a year in, so we saw bombings and things like that. And then my parents got divorced. My mom wanted to go back to the Soviet Union, so we did. And I was there sort of depressed because I was in the middle of this, after being in a very, having sort of access and almost like this landscape of the world of being an international person. I'm in a land of mediocrity and limitations and sort of tyranny. And but then I then happened to be there right when I was graduating college to witness the fall, the complete collapse of the Soviet Empire right before my eyes, right? So again, for the third time in my life, I'm in civil unrest. I see tanks in the street. Again, an attempted coup actually that failed. And then I grew up basically with two Marxist parents who told me about the ideals and everything that I believed. And then I compared that to reality. And then I was studying economics and I was actually studying Karl Marx and writing papers and then seeing just the misery, the mediocrity, the grayness of it all. And I became intensely anti-communist. And what happened then, which was completely shocking, is that when the whole thing fell apart, now it became this complete free marketplace, right? Complete freedom, like you can do anything. And I decided, of all things, to not go into economics, but to go into music because I was musical my whole life. And just because of the forces of the market, I became one of the top pop artists in all of that space of ex-Soviet Union, 15 different countries. I toured all over the place. And then a few years later, as I was literally peaking, I had this.
Actually,
Well, no,
that
go
that
ahead.
that, that's got to be quite the culture shock. Because you talk about growing up in Mozambique, one of the poorest countries in the world. Now you live here. You went through Russia and the post-Soviet Union. You're a pop star. You're getting attention. You're living a good life. The shock of that must have been amazing.
Disorienting, absolutely. And obviously, fame does plays tricks on you, but it was fantastic, right? To be able to create music and bring joy and have millions of people love your music. And then the communists were actually making a comeback, and Boris Yeltsin was trying to get reelected in '96, and he was trailing in the polls. And I just happened to have a very massive new generation sort of freedom loving anthem at the time called Our Generation. So his people basically reached out to my people, and we campaigned for him against the communists. Of course, that made for complicated conversations with my parents, but it and Boris Yeltsin won. So, you know, I would never say we swayed that we influenced the outcome, but we definitely contribute to defeating the communists in literally the mothership of all communist places, right, on earth. So anyway, it's just a crazy story.
It's funny. I was born here. Uh, I've lived my entire life in the United States. I remember as a child playing, duck and cover, teaching, being taught that in school, and being afraid of the Soviet Union and their imminent attack. You grew up in exactly opposite situation,
We
but
did,
we
yeah.
both ended up with this idea that you know what, as much as I complain about America, it's a great place to live. It's a wonderful place to live. I understand why you wrote a love letter to the United States. You know, I was fascinated by the breadth of your story because somewhere in there you talk about the Soviet Union and what communism was really like, what it was like living under that form of system, and you started yearning for what something me as an American took for granted. Didn't think a second thing. Just having access to music, going to a record store and buying a cassette or CD was nothing, and for
Yeah,
you it was
we
everything.
couldn't. Oh, we had to hustle to get a pirated copy of some sort of music, which with a massive delay, by the way, right? With a massive
Yep.
delay. In order for me to hear anything that is fresh, I had to, in the middle of the night, tune into BBC or Voice of America on my shortwave radio. That's the only place at the time.
It's funny. As a kid, I had a friend that he would. There were radio stations that would play whole albums at night, and he would record them on cassette. That's how he got his copies. This idea of what I take for granted is access to information you dreamt of is almost impossible. Now you're here in post-Soviet or there in post-Soviet Russia, and you're contributing to political events to this massive change. But you talk about going back to communism. Was the people embracing communism, or was it just falling back? Place.
You mean sort of the reversal of freedom, correct? Is that
Yeah,
what you're referring to?
yeah.
That's the funny thing that I think because it's so nuanced and weird that most people actually don't understand, right? That it's the powers that came after Yeltsin, and ironically, we were voting for him as essentially the guarantor of a future that's democratic. The irony is that he ended up being the one who appointed Vladimir Putin to power, right? And I'm like, okay, great, thanks, And and what happened is that party and Putin specifically, they introduced this sort of blend, right? It was not communist, actually. The communists are supporting them, but it's not communist. It is a blend of this, it's restoring the Russian Empire to its former glory. So it's very nationalistic. Its nostalgia is sort of whitewashing some of the crimes of the Bolsheviks, like Stalin, for example, over the last decade has increased in popularity in the polls, for example, in Russians, which is stunning, right? To think it's like Hitler increasing in popularity in Germany. Um, so it's this very, very sophisticated and nuanced, almost like capitalization on a certain trend of the people of historic cultural trends of Russia. It's understanding sort of the Russian soul and weaving a story of that will entice them, right? That will resonate with them to stay in power and gather support.
It reminds me a bit of the story of Israel in the book of Exodus. Israel they come out of Egypt, and almost immediately they start going, we want to go back. We had meat, we had bread, we had leeks. It was wonderful there. They forgot all of the bad things. They forgot the slavery and the hard labor. They forgot it all. It sounds like a very similar situation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a very much a modern version
It's
of that.
very much, yes, it's very much appealing and weaving a story that essentially almost like whitewashes the past, right? So, yeah, do you remember there was no one went hungry. There were no homeless people. There were no jobless people. College education was free. Medicine was free. And that is all true, right? That is all absolutely true. And yet you have tyranny. You have no freedom. There's no free speech. All of media is controlled by the government. People live in fear of the government. That's just the status quo. It's a reign of mediocrity. There is no upward mobility. Entrepreneurship is literally illegal, you know? And to some people, I think that's just like with the Israelites in the story of the Exodus. That was good. It's almost like safety over liberty. That's what it is. That's the trade-off, right? Safety over liberty. And I think that's the current the reversal, right, of course in Russia. It's not even a return to communism. It is essentially a world where safety over liberty is the choice, and it gets consolidated and increased, and the propaganda, all kinds of things. It's not only propaganda, it's financial incentives, is the way things are run. And I believe it was Benjamin Franklin. I want to say it was him who said, the people who choose to lose essential liberty for a little, it was safety, deserve neither liberty nor safety. I
Yeah,
think it was him who said that.
yeah, I was going to point that out, right? Benjamin Franklin, who said he who would give up essential liberty for a promise of temporary safety deserved neither liberty nor safety.
That's exactly,
And
yeah.
it
That's
it
that's
it
the quote that I was trying to quote that I
you know
misquoted, but the essence is the essence.
exactly. I use that quote frequently. What would you give up for a promise of being taken care of being bought and paid for, of being enslaved to someone else's will? We don't think along those lines. We don't think of things that way. But that's truly what Franklin was warning us about. So, there's, again, I was interested in your history. Where do we get from the Soviet Union to the United States?
What are we getting now, you mean,
Well,
culturally?
no, no. In your life, how did you go from the Soviet Union to the United States? Actually, before we go there, I've got a break coming up. Let me take care of this break, and we'll pick up this idea after the break. Welcome back, everyday Americans. You've rejoined the Constitution study. Today, I have Christian Ray Flores, and we're talking about loving America. He wrote a book, The Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America, a love letter from an immigrant. Christian, thank you for joining me. We've been talking about your early life, and we left it off. You were in the Soviet Union, and I was curious how you ended up going from the Soviet Union to the United States.
Well, it was actually I didn't I was living the American dream in Russia, actually, right? If you think about it, and I sort of point that out in the book that it's almost like a frequency you tune into. And I remember tuning into that the frequency of prosperity, of capitalism, of freedom, of entrepreneurship when I was living in Africa because, and I was my world was just almost like a different planet. And there I would get those American shows that we actually got this big antenna to get South African television. We didn't even have television in Mozambique at the time. And there was this sort of bad reception, and these American shows would go on. And I would look at this world where people dressed a certain way, lived in certain types of places, and I would go, this is almost like a parallel universe. And I start tuning into that frequency, reading books, watching movies, obviously, and things like that. And it appealed to me, it resonated with me. And I shaped my mindset around those things, even when I was back in Russia. And in fact, that's what gave me the success in show business. I treated music as an entrepreneurial creative sort of exercise and so I had a very American approach to my career, and that's what made me successful. But I actually never intended to move to the States, but I did marry an American. She's from Wisconsin, my wife Deb, and she moved from Los Angeles. She's from Wisconsin, but she lived in Los Angeles at the time, and she used to work in show business as well, so she was sort of familiar with the space. And we lived there for 5 years. We had our children there. And we came actually not because of any political tension or anything like that. We moved to the States because her health was suffering from the climate. The climate is terrible in Moscow, right? And that's how we moved.
It's funny to me. I've lived in this country my entire. I was born in New York City, lived upstate New York most of my life. 10 years ago, I got fed up with the empire, and I moved here to Middle Tennessee. And in America, it's a relatively simple thing to do, but to move from all of these countries, these are not a big thing. But to move from being a well-known, a celebrity in Russia to the United States, that's a big move. Somewhere, I'm curious what it was like along the line to go from post-Soviet Russia to the United States. Yeah, I tend to focus on the Soviet Union because that's what I grew up with. But you're talking post-Soviet Russia to coming to the United States and fall in love with this country.
Mhm.
But where did that lead to this idea for your little book of big reasons to love America?
Basically, what happened is we started visiting before we moved. We started visiting, coming, stateside for Christmas to see Deb's parents, because, at the time, Christmas was not very celebrated well in Russia at all. So she was super depressed every Christmas, and I'm like, you know what? We just need to go to the States every time, every year. So we would go there, and I would observe. I would have these observations about, oh my gosh, how life is just the standard of living, the baseline of everything is just different. And when we moved, it sort of continued. So I would just comment to her, "Hey, this is amazing and that's amazing. Not only economically, culturally, customs and systems and infrastructure. I'm an economist, so I even have that angle. And eventually she would just go, Christian, these are actually pretty insightful things that I wouldn't have because I grew up here, but you should write those down. And that's essentially what happened is I said, okay, so, I pushed it away for a while. And also I didn't want it to get for people to think it's political because it's not. It's really more about what is in America that creates an environment for so many people to thrive and flourish? What makes it tick that way in a very unique way? And I basically decided to write 10 chapters, 10 reasons to love America, and then, have a combination of things like easy read, but also with a lot of substance. And you can read the whole thing in about, an evening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And put in illustrations from my personal archives and combined with illustrations generated by AI and created QR codes for videos that basically I tell stories that didn't even make it to the book. So I made it sort of like an immersive experience where I'm trying to point out something actually quite significant and special, but in an easy to consume way, and then illustrate it with actually real life experiences in 6 different countries. This is my fourth continent. This is my sixth country. And the whole thing is about my love letter to America and trying to help Americans who've lived here for a while to be proud of their country, to cherish it, to protect it, to nurture. the treasure that we have here as Americans.
Yeah, in 4 different continents. I've barely been out of the country. I've observed that people that come here from other countries, especially communist countries, socialist companies, are amazed by our freedom. There's an intensity to that love. For example, I've been married to my wife for now 36 years. Now, I love my wife intensely, but it's not the same as when I first fell in love with her. There was that all-consuming desire, that focus that was there. That's kind of what happens when the difference in me, someone who's lived here all my life, has that long-term love, but someone who first comes here has this passion of love. It's the things you write about I think are important, but I've never seen them from that point of view. I've never been in countries that poor. I've never lived under a communist or a socialist nation. I love when people bring that because I've never experienced it. And it allows me to see this country through those loving eyes, those fresh eyes. It's like seeing the world through a child's eyes. It's new. It's like we're in America, we're here, and we're on Christmas morning opening all the presents, and we're unhappy because we didn't get the one present we really wanted. And we ignore all the wonderful presents we have. That's why I love when people come here and to share their stories and to see that Christmas morning through the awe of someone who's seeing a real first Christmas, American Christmas. Like, wow. This, it just shows us again, this is a great place to live. And, we have our problems, but how do we keep this a great place to live? In your book, you focus on family and how important family is, and how those things are missing in so many of the countries we look at that have lived under communism. Many of them fallen and collapsed. They don't have the family values. Talk a little bit about that, if you would, please.
Okay, so one caveat though, right? Okay,
Hmm.
one caveat is this. In the global south, places like Latin America, Africa, places like that, you see families be tighter and more intergenerational than American, right?
Hmm.
Which we actually have lost some of the intergenerational part because of economic prosperity. So people have upward mobility, they up and go any city in the world, they chase jobs to places. That's actually for thousands of years not has been the case. It hasn't been the case or baseline for family yet. There's a multi-generational wisdom that gets passed along. Now, having said that, there is even America in its modern iteration right now in the West still has this. I think my theory is that it was because all these immigrants came from places where there's, several structures that keep you sort of, in in bound, I guess, in the boundaries of normal, right, society. But family is one, but there's also religion and state and socioeconomic status and castes and things like that. When the immigrants came to the US, they left all of these things behind, these sort of frameworks that they had. And the only thing they had to rely on is their family. So in some ways, the family values in America are stronger than anywhere else because of that, because everybody's from somewhere else, right? And I think that's what created the wave of this, okay, we're going to take care of each other, we're going to make your life better than the previous generation, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's one aspect that I think is really important. And the other one is
I
just
was going to say, almost as if in giving up on everything you knew, you embrace the one thing you still have, and that was
precisely
family. Yes. Okay.
and I think that's unique in America, right? And it perpetuates as a cultural ripple effect over time. The other dimension, I think, is the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Christian faith, and I can testify to that because I come from a complete atheist background. Literally, no one I knew believed in God, right? Growing up until probably my early 20s is when I started seeing people who had a little bit of that. And of course, the family unit, uh, courtship, marriage, uh, all of these dimensions, they were not instilled. So you picked it up almost like a mosaic from people around you, but without really a coherent cultural framework. You just didn't have that. And as a result of that, I believe the family unit especially in Marxist countries, because the faith was eradicated. Literally, it was it was the opiate of the people, right? That's what
Mhm.
Marx said. But the Bolsheviks, they literally burned and blew up churches. They killed the priests, and I mean, they tried to completely remove, like a cancer, and it was impossible to remove because eternity is on men's heart, right? So faith persisted. Then they became a little bit more tolerant towards it, etc. But they also kept it. They never promoted it. They kept it under wraps. They put KGB agents in the clergy, like all that stuff, right? So I grew up in this unspiritual space, and I now come from three generations of broken homes, right? The carnage is intense. So, as a matter of fact, when I became a Christian, it was because I just came to the realization I don't know how to build a family. I really want to know how to build a family, and I don't know how to build a family. No one taught me. And I met this guy who was a missionary, a Canadian missionary, and he had this amazing family. And I said, "How do you build a family?" And he goes, "I'll teach you from the Bible." And I said, "All right." And I was literally at the top, at the peak of my career, entertaining millions of people. And I submitted to this guy, and I said, "Please tell me what to do." And I learned everything about family values from scripture and from being coached, essentially mentored, apprenticing under this person. And then I had other mentors, etc., and literally transformed my life, right? And I think if you multiply that by 200 million people, 250 million people, a strong family makes a strong society, period. You undermine family values, the family unit in general, you start sort of corroding it, criticizing it, saying it's unnecessary, you will destroy your society, which is exactly what the communists did, to this day. Like scientists, I interview some of the top experts on happiness, for example, on my podcast. Like I had this one guy who says, in Europe, the most unhappy people are Eastern Europe, post-communist. I said, why? It says because under communism, they destroyed these sort of core pillar things that makes a human being flourish, and that is family, right? So anyway, I thought maybe I went a little too long with the answer, but that's my answer.
No, no, I remember reading it in the book, and it was a fascinating observation to see the importance of the family unit and how it is broken down in this country, and parallel the problems we've seen growing in this country. The family and God are replaced by the state, but it cannot do a very good job of this. We see the breakdowns as the breakdowns in our families have come across. We see the problems in the country. It does make a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it explains, but it's like in your love letters, you found something so fundamental that was worth saving. I love this. This is important. I know I wrote love letters to my wife. I'm sure you wrote love letters. You probably wrote love songs to your wife.
That I
You are a
did actually.
musician.
Yeah, I did.
I spent 30 years in IT. There's not no such thing as a love program to your wife. It just doesn't work. But I do want to talk a bit more about specifically about the book and where they can find out more about you and all that, which I want to do on the other side of the break. But I'll tell you, this is a first experience. This is the first time I've had a guest that we've kept over for the entire program. I think this is the type of information my audience wants. I think they'll find this invaluable and how important it is. So hang on with me, and we'll be right back with Christian Ray Flores after this break. Welcome back, everyday Americans. You've rejoined the Constitution study. Today, it's been my pleasure to talk with Christian Ray Flores and about his book, The Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. You keep talking about happiness, and it made me think of the Declaration of Independence. In fact, we have a pursuit of happiness as a right, the right to pursue happiness, not to be happy. And it's funny. It's the pursuit. I think when it's done properly, is really what makes us happy.
I agree. And you know what? I in the book I mentioned a couple of things that these are my interpretations, obviously, right? But first of all, they adopted, they inherited that quote, those values from John Locke, right? And he was, I think, British.
Mhm.
And because it was the pursuit of property, that was the last phrase.
Right.
And the founders, the ones who wrote the Constitution, they replaced it with the pursuit of happiness. And I think that's not by chance, right? It's almost like this cultural DNA being inserted in the very heart, the document that describes the DNA of a nation. And I find it to be extraordinary. Not that it was written, because you can write all kinds of things, right? Countries have constitutions that never worked and they're never enforced all over the world.
The Soviet
This
Union had a constitution.
Exactly, and it was completely ignored by, you know, like it's all over the world. Like it's just
Yeah.
a piece of paper. No, no, no. The precious thing in America is that this pursuit of happiness, it's actually a cultural baseline. It's the DNA. It took, right? And what I sort of try to unpack a little bit is that to the modern ear, it might even feel a little okay, of course they want to pursue happiness. They're Americans, they're self-seeking, they're, individualistic, and to a degree that's very true. But the meaning of the word when it was written, was actually slightly different because the pursuit of happiness, I don't think it was meant as you chase after happiness. It was meant like you pursue a career in surgery, for example. You're not expected to like chase surgery. No, you're pursuing a skill, an ability. You are expected to master that thing, right? So I think the meaning was we have the right to master the happiness, a joyful, a fulfilled life in this earth. And then happiness itself, even the meaning was not this superficial, haha, pleasure seeking and thing. What it was really more connected to the word which was very popular, I think, in the Enlightenment, which is eudaimonia, right? Which is inherited from the Greeks. The Greeks talked about it. So it's not happiness that is superficial and self-seeking. It's happiness that is deep, that serves people around you. It's honor, it's wholeness. It's just a fuller meaning of the word happiness. So if you,
It's the Hebrew word shalom.
shalom, that's precisely
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
That deeper thing. And yeah, you're right. Locke and the pursuit of property versus the pursuit of happiness. I think it was interesting when Jefferson changed that to pursuit of happiness. I can pursue what makes me happy. Again, whether it's to be an author or a musician or a software engineer or whatever it is that makes you happy, you have the chance to pursue that. I live out in the country. I have a big chunk of land, and that's what makes me happy. I have a cousin that lives in New York City in an apartment. That's what makes him happy. We have the liberty to do what makes us happy, to pursue our own happiness without somebody else telling us how to live our lives and what we should find. This is what will make you happy. No, I want to pursue what makes me happy. You pursue what makes you happy. And as long as we don't step on each other's toes, we can pursue whatever happiness we want.
And what that also does is if you know what makes you happy, right?
Mhm.
If you want to master it, and I really believe that pursuit is the desire to master
Mhm.
that, right? Uh, you will overcome obstacles. You will make sacrifices. You will work harder. You will give it your all, and then because you did so, you will bless everybody who comes in contact with you because you're that good at that thing, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to top down, where the government, somebody in the sky, right, some unelected group of weirdos, will literally dictate to 200 million people what they should believe.
Mhm.
Tell me how that's going to play out when it comes to using your talents, your gift, your grit. It's not. What it creates is this complete world of mediocrity, of limitations
Your happiness doesn't matter. The
at
state's
all.
happiness does. And
Exactly.
that's what you end up with.
And you don't matter. So you're brainwashing millions of people to basically believe that the only way their lives matter is that they serve the glory of the state.
Mhm.
And that's how you end up with countries that sacrifice, that create carnage, that limit economic opportunities. That I mean, and people are like sheep. I mean, actually, they're not sheep in the biblical sense. They're goats, probably, right? If you think about that, right?
Yep.
And it's to me, it was horrifying to had sort of these glimpses of freedom and color and opportunity traveling the world, and then entering back into the Soviet state at age 14, for example, and seeing the contrast, right? And just seeing how gray, how depressing all of that is, and how much fear there was. And I tell the story in the book, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this when it comes to sort of this contrast between lack of opportunity and a dream to transcend yourself. I would be in high school and I would doodle in my notebook, and I'll be super bored. I'm sort of ADHD, and for some reason, I would draw logos of Western brands, Adidas. I wanted to own something by Adidas. I didn't own anything by Adidas because I didn't have access to anything, maybe in the black market for a lot of money, and which I didn't have. And I would draw like Nike and Adidas, and for some reason, I liked Kiss, the logo for Kiss, with the Diebel lightning, and Michael Jackson, and he had like a logo with the pointy shoes and the socks and everything, and I knew when I was drawing this, to me, it exemplified opportunity, entrepreneurship, creativity, all of these things that are sort of quintessential to the West. And I knew that I would never see Michael Jackson in real life. I would never own an Adidas. Maybe when I grow up in the black market, I'll get something from Adidas, right? And then when freedom came, when the free market actually came, and I became an artist, I had actually had an endorsement deal with Adidas. My poster was on every Adidas store. I had an endorsement deal with Head and Shoulders. I had an endorsement deal with Guess. Michael Jackson actually came to my charity event. We did massive events for orphans. And then when I moved to the States, I had a production company in LA for a while doing sort of Hollywood level music production and music videos. Actually worked in the studio of Kiss producing an album for an Eastern European rock band. And I was working with a producer who produced the albums for Kiss. Like, it's just mind blowing, right? And
Yep.
that is the contrast. And I tell those stories because I want people to understand that this is a tremendous country. And if you just dream and if you just apply yourself, you can do so many things. And the perceived lack of resources here don't even compare to the lack of resources people have in other places, right?
It's funny. I tell my audience that when I speak at these events, we tend to focus on the big things, DC, the president. We really should be focusing on small things, the local things, city, town, county. You have more control, you have more influence over those. But if you think about it, that's where you live.
Oh,
And
100%. Yeah.
I can't make a change in Washington, but I can make a change here in Middle Tennessee. I can have an impact here. If I can make my county, my town a little better, well, then I've done a good thing and I will enjoy that. I'll be happy to have a freer place to live in, to make this better for my daughter, which is my goal. I mean, I have a daughter. I want to leave America a little bit freer to her than what I inherited and then where we
Yes.
sit now. We kind of almost brush those ideas aside, pushing for the big picture. But if I make my county a little better, so if I can do that, and I speak at neighboring counties, if I can make them better, freer, I can change Tennessee. And I do this across the country. I speak all across the country. If I can make those states better, Washington D.C. with all of its problems becomes immaterial. It doesn't matter anymore. And this idea of a top-down directed society, whether it be economic or social or medical, it disappears when we start looking at the little things, the local things, and how can I help my neighbor? How can I improve the businesses in my town? How can I do those things better? And those are probably the biggest impacts we can have if we realize that, because we have a lot more power locally than we ever will nationally. The Constitution of most of our states say that all power is inherent in the people. The Constitutions of most of our states say that all power is inherent in the people. Well, if all the people learned that, or if we did, as John Jay said, learn to defend and assert our rights, and that's the goal that we have here at the Constitution Study. So when I see someone like you who's come here, who's raised in another land and sees this is a great place. No, we're not perfect, but we're good, and we can be better. This not about how do you make America great again. She's been great, but the question is, what can we do to make it just a little bit better?
That's exactly it. I had a friend over a couple of days ago, and that's exactly what he was expressing. Is like, I'm sort of really stressed out. I'm watching the news and all this controversy and all this swirling stuff, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I need to like uninstall all the news app. And I looked at him. Of course, he's an American, right? And I'm looking at him as an immigrant, and I go, why are you stressed out, dude? And I basically said, do you realize that I mean, all of those, the American political drama is all very important and it's messy and it's good that it's messy because it's free, right? But in America right now, you are a free person. Right now.
Yeah.
Why would you lose sleep over something that actually does not encroach in you in any way that is comparable to what I've experienced in my life? And I basically gave him an example. I said, look, I've started three companies. One of them failed. I have two now. I've started nonprofits here. I've been here for 20 years doing stuff like that, right? Taking chances, taking risks, giving my heart, serving people, serving my clients, doing media, doing coaching, doing, music production, things like that. In 20 years, I said, in 20 years, I have not heard from a state official talking to me about my businesses or been even in an office of the government about my businesses. I'm so grateful that no one is messing with me. I'm just free to do my stuff. What I said, do you imagine, like, let me tell you what happens, let's say in Russia, even today. If I had like three businesses, two nonprofits, I would hear from the government. They would harass me, they would control me, they were trying to extort me. People, even the tax authorities, would try to find something and maybe make me pay them extra under the table. If that wasn't enough, I would probably have other people because the business environment is so aggressive and so opportunistic. If I do well, if I make millions in my business, another person will try to do something to take my business from me. If that's not enough, my government will do something really stupid, go to start a war or something, and my currency will be devalued by 30 to 50% overnight. Do you have any idea how different that is from here? Like I sort of went off, not in a bad way. I was just trying to inspire the guy. But I'm telling you, as an immigrant, this is the reality. This is the contrast. And, with all the drama and everything, I am like, this is fantastic. Thank you.
We're complaining about first world problems, right? We're in a country where the biggest medical problem is obesity, not starvation.
That's exactly
Christian,
it.
we've been a wonderful opportunity to talk with you. Tell me where you can find out more about you and your book and follow you more.
Okay, so you just have to go to Amazon, put in Christian Ray Flores, and you'll find my book right away. So that's easy. If you want to, I create a lot of content just to equip people. I do a lot of professional coaching for people. So I create a lot of media and tell a lot of stories in my newsletter. I have a newsletter that goes out twice a week. One of it is free. The other one's only for paid subscribers. If you go to christianrayflores.com, you'll find it. Basically, the best stuff I have, the best resources, books, hacks, everything to help you flourish in your life. It's in my newsletter. So that's probably the best way to find me.
Christian, thank you for your time. It's truly been a pleasure. I'm so glad we had a chance to sit down and talk and have this conversation. God bless you and have a wonderful love life with your newly adopted country.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for being a voice for freedom and liberty in honestly the best country in the world.